Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor, where we bring you the best guests in all of true crime. This is a STS special, Surviving My Biggest Case. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning journalist, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to this special episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. This is an STS special, Surviving My Biggest Case, with the Geo Profiler himself, Doug MacGregor. For those who do not know, Doug is better known as the Geo Profiler. He's a forensic behavioral analyst and a consultant specializing in geographic profiling and linkage analysis for violent crime and missing persons. He has a Master's of Science from Missouri State University, lives up in the Great White North in Ottawa, Canada, with his wife and two children. Doug, welcome to you.
Thanks for having me, Joel. Happy to be here.
So the first and most obvious question, I guess, would be who or what is a geo-profiler?
Sure. I guess to understand geographic profiling, you first have to understand a bit of what environmental criminology is. It's obviously a branch of criminology. I guess there's two components to environmental criminology. There's obviously the one that a lot of people think of first, environmental crimes. Wildlife, poaching, illegal hunting, pollution, dumping waste, that kind of thing. So obviously that's not what I do. The other component of environmental criminology is where I come into play. So it's it's looking at your natural, your built, your social environments, and how does crime play a role in those environments, and criminal activity play a role in those environments. Geographic profiling is one practical application of environmental criminology. Another application would be CPTED, which is crime prevention through environmental design. So that's kind of where, just at its base, where geographic profiling falls in the larger scheme of policing and criminology itself.
And I'm always curious how somebody becomes what they are. I know you have other talents in the world. You fought mixed martial arts, carpentry, a lot of things. But what got you interested in geo-profiling specifically? I mean, why not? Doug MacGregor could have been a Canadian, a Mountie. You could have been a police officer. How come you chose this?
Yeah. It was a long journey and had a lot of twists and turns along the way. And I think what got me here, it's multifaceted. So I had, my academic journey and my personal journey. And then there's all the little things that you add in along the way, your interests, what do you like to watch? Well, I love Criminal Minds and The Mentalist and these types of shows. And obviously I grew up with that kind of stuff and I was always interested in that. But realistically, initially I wanted to be in some form of military or the intelligence field. That was my primary interest initially. And law enforcement wasn't really an option for me because I was diagnosed with epilepsy at 16. So I wasn't allowed to drive an emergency vehicle. I could now. I haven't had a seizure in 13 years, I believe. So, it's a possibility now, but that's kind of what steered me away from law enforcement, policing specifically initially. So, being interested in military, intelligence, those fields, I went into political science. I did a bachelor's in political science with international relations as a concentration and a minor in the Russian language. After that, I went and I did, as you mentioned, my Master's of Science in Defense and Strategic Studies. I did that out of Missouri State University. Our department was in Fairfax, Virginia. I also got accepted into Hawaii Pacific University, and as well as another university out of California, out of San Bernardino. Looking back on it, the Hawaii Pacific campus would have been pretty nice, but I picked Washington, DC, just because there was a lot of internship opportunities there. And I did intern at the Heritage Foundation as a defense and foreign policy intern. I believe I was the only Canadian at the time, and I probably still am the only Canadian that's ever interned there. After that, go ahead.
No, I mean, so that's interesting. So, I mean, just back to like, the Mentalist and these, CSI type shows. I never thought I'd be hosting a true crime podcast, but when I look back on it, I was always, very obsessive when it came to watching Dateline and 2020. I was just always very curious about what's going on in these people's minds. I'm the son of a psychiatrist and a social worker, so psychologically, it's always interested me. But when you would watch like The Mentalist that you just mentioned, what was it about these shows that specifically intrigued you?
Obviously, I liked all the real life based shows as well, as you just mentioned, but the fictional shows, it was just I think it was the behavioral, the psychological factor of it. It was never black and white, for these type shows. It was more the underlying human offender behavior that I was very interested in. I liked all your CSI type shows as well, that focus on like the forensics science part of it. But and I did my sciences in high school and stuff. I never followed that path. That wasn't really what drew me in to the law enforcement field. So I think in terms of those fictional shows, that's what really, spoke to me.
So one case that you and I covered really closely, of course, is the tragic murder of Rachel Morin. And you're, a lot of the private consulting that you do, you're kind of restricted because you have to sign agreements. But, everyone really knows the Rachel Morin story. And of course, Brian Koberger, the horrific story out of Moscow, Idaho, the person suspected of murdering 4 young college students. But just kind of sticking with Rachel Morin, just so there's some sort of practical attachment to what we're talking about here. Rachel was actually, I think it's her anniversary almost to the day. I think tomorrow was a year just about where she was on a hiking trail in Maryland, the Monpont Trail. She's yanked off the trail and found basically bludgeoned to death the next day. Eventually, months and months go by, but through IgG and other techniques, the Harford County Sheriff is able to put together a DNA profile, and eventually they catch a suspect who was originally from El Salvador and wanted for murder there as well, and will likely never see the light of day. But using this story, which is a real tragedy, you hear a woman is murdered on a hiking trail. What kicks in instinctively as a geo-profiler? What are the first things you are looking for and trying to figure out from your perspective using these tools to solve crimes?
Sure. My first questions are, what happened? That's number one. What happened? What are the details? And, all the details. So whether I'm working for law enforcement or working, in this case, for Rachel Morin's family, members of Rachel Morin's family, what are all the details that I can have? If I'm working for law enforcement, I obviously get more. But so what are all the details? And that includes, what happened? What's the crime scene details? What are the details of the, as a geographic profiler, of the natural and the built environment around, all the details and concerning timeline, just anything you can give me. And then from there, I branch out and I have to do a lot of analysis myself and dig for more answers to more questions. In Rachel's case, that's how it started. And I'm also looking at once I get into it, I'm looking at, are there suspects? And if there are not suspects, who are we looking at? What are we looking at? And, where did they come from? How did they commit this crime? And, where you might have an offender profiler look at the who, the what, the why, I'm really looking at the where and the when. I'm trying to answer those questions. So how did this person enter this place? What, where did they come from? Why were they in that specific space? And why were they in that area, right? Are they in that area because they're visiting, because they live there, because they work there? So I'm trying to answer these questions. And, going back to what I mentioned just a few minutes ago, environmental criminology, an environmental criminologist is going to look at Rachel's case and say, why was this crime committed in this space at this time, on this trail at this time? I'm also going to come from that perspective, but I'm going to go one step further and say, what are the spatial, temporal, environmental, and geographic elements of this person's human behavior that committed this crime in this space at this time? So who is this person? I'm going more on a psychological level, behavioral level.
Wow. So again, using, I guess, let's use Rachel's case as kind of a barometer for all this. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, is one of the first things you're going to do physically look at her location where she was assaulted on a map? And then in her case, there was, some like I want to say a strip mall or something very close by through like one of the trails at the end of the trail. I mean, are you trying to, for lack of a better way to ask this question, are you almost looking at like a Google map of where this happened and then slowly kind of pulling it out to get a literal sense of the geography and the topography of this location? And then what you said is trying to figure out who would be here, when would they have been there, where specifically, the when and wheres that you just mentioned. Am I off base, or are you looking at are you actually looking at maps that way?
No, that's exactly it. I first need to get a sense of this location. I need to immerse myself in this location and, think of how I would act as both the victim and the offender in this situation, in this environment. So, I'm using mapping or GIS software. Google Earth is is the best mapping software out there. It's the most powerful. So I'm on Google Earth. I'm getting a sense of this area. I'm using other applications and software that can give some more detailed imagery of the area, and just to get a real sense of what it is and where this took place.
And what's the GIS software? Forgive my ignorance.
Sure, it's Geographic Information Systems. So there's just a slight difference. So mapping software such as Google Earth, there's no real analytical capabilities. GIS software is mapping software with analytical capabilities at its most basic sense. So an example of that is I can put in a bunch of different data points into GIS software, and it can pop up a heat map of like where crime is central or is most likely to occur in a certain town. So it can show me crime hotspots, right? Using that data. Google Earth just doesn't have those analytical capabilities. But in terms of free software and mapping, it is the most powerful. So I start with the mapping software or the GIS software. And as in Rachel's case, if I can, I want to get boots on the ground. And I'm fortunate enough that I'm able to have that ability more and more now as cases have picked up, clientele have picked up, and geographic profiling is spreading. So I'm able to get boots on the ground more frequently, as I was just out in the Pacific Northwest getting some boots on the ground for a case out there, and getting the boots on the ground, immersing yourself in that environment is, it's just night and day. The mapping software can tell you so much sitting behind a computer screen, but when I was there physically on the Mon Pod Trail, there's so much to that environment that it's impossible to know looking at a computer screen. So it really is, although it's not imperative to a case that I do that, it's very beneficial that I do.
Yeah, and so what are the added benefits? I mean, I can tell you firsthand. I say this to everyone. Rather than covering a case, watching it on court TV, a trial, it's obviously always way better to be in the courthouse. You're going to meet people. You're going to talk to people. You're going to have that tangible and concrete, tactile experience. For you as a geo-profiler, how does the game change when you're physically in a location where someone was either, brutally attacked and or murdered?
Sure. In Rachel's case, it was big things. So obviously you had the Mon Pod Trail, the main trail that went through the area. But in the forest, you have all these smaller man-made or animal trails that are winding through the brush. And it is critical to know those trails, where they come from, where they lead to, and because those are all, for example, entry exit points. And looking at, a mapping software, you're not going to see those trails. So that's a big one and that applied to Rachel's case specifically. Another example is, if you're in that environment, you take in the smells, you take in the sound, you take in all the sights, which is, and these things are so critical because you really have to know what happened at that crime scene. And, an example, if you're there, if you're standing where Rachel was attacked, you can see what natural surveillance was around there, who could see that spot, who couldn't see that spot. You can hear sounds. So you'd be able to hear if something occurred or didn't occur. You can physically go into places you can't get on mapping software, such as the tunnel where Rachel was found. And all these things are obviously just impossible from behind a computer screen. So it really is important to immerse yourself in the environment.
And I mean, before we go further with what you do and how you do it, I mean, how rare are you? I mean, how many geo-profilers are there? I mean, obviously you're Canadian, but here in the United States, do you have a sense of how many people do this for a living?
I think there's only 2 in the world that do this full time, to my knowledge.
Wow.
Myself and another colleague in law enforcement in another country. Now I know of a few more, but I don't think they do it full time. Sam Lundgren out of the UK, she's very talented. I'm not sure if she does it full time. Wow. I know of a geo-profiler in Italy and one in South Africa. Again, I'm not sure if they do it full time or not. And now there are a number of analysts across the world that have been trained in geographic profiling. For the most part, they apply it to crime analysis. So I'm not sure how often they'd use it, and they generally use it for nonviolent crime. ATM thefts, bank robberies, youth crime, that kind of thing, auto theft. But in terms of violent crime and missing persons, I believe I'm the only one to work on those specific activities full time.
Wow. I had no idea. So this is super rare. Let me ask you this. I mean, how are you received? Like, for example, body language experts. Sometimes, in a court of law, they'll say it's junk science or whatever, the term that they'll use. How are you generally received by law enforcement when you come onto a scene or a case?
I think I'm received pretty well, and the acceptance of geographic profiling is growing. Now, it's tough because in my experience, very few people in the public or law enforcement even know what geographic profiling is. I think more people are understanding what it is. And I think a large part of that is because I'm in the media and I'm posting on social media. But very few people in law enforcement, and I've worked with, attorney general's offices, they don't even know what it is. So the skepticism, I don't think is even there yet. What I would say is it's a tool. It's a tool like anything else, like body language experts, handwriting analysis, and polygraphs. These are all tools. Some places they're used in court. Some places they're not permitted to be used in court. And what geographic profiling is kind of, it incorporates STEM fields in STEM, the hard sciences. It incorporates those sciences that are kind of gray areas, like geography, for example. It takes into account IT, data analysis. It uses, forensics. It uses IT. It uses all those hard sciences, but it also takes in a large behavioral side of it. And it kind of overlaps, like I mentioned earlier, with offender profiling, right? Which isn't a hard science by any means. So it kind of takes best of both worlds there. But I don't think I haven't seen geographic profiling used in court yet. It may very well be in the future. And I do work for prosecutors, getting them ready for court, work with their cases. So I think down the road it will be, because there is a lot of science behind geographic profiling.
Wow. So it sounds like it's very much a technique that is, on the cusp of growing. Just want to remind everyone to please, if you're enjoying the conversation, subscribe to Surviving the Survivor. Also hit that like button. And we're putting out things you can't access anywhere else related to cases like the Adelsons on our Patreon channel. Doug, back to what we were just talking about. So in the case of Rachel Morin, again, this mother of 5, 37 years old, she's out on a hiking trail a year ago, August, and she's bludgeoned to death. They end up finding out that there's a DNA match to a crime in Los Angeles. They didn't have the identification of the person, only the DNA. How does this fit into geo-profiling and how you would be assessing this case? How are you picking up these, secondary and tertiary pieces of the puzzle here?
Yeah, it just expands the profile for me. Every little piece of information helps me expand my profile and develop it. Every profile I do, and I think this is a trap that some profilers fall into, is that they give a finite profile. They go on media and they say, this is who the person is. This is who your offender is. And a traditional profiler, criminal profiler, they're looking at mental, emotional, psychological characteristics of a person. I never give a finished product a finite profile. I always say from the get-go that, my profile, it's a working profile, it's flexible, and it evolves. It evolves as a case goes on. And, the Rachel Morin case is a perfect example. Initially, I was just looking at Bel Air, with the Mom Pod Trail at the middle, and I was looking at Bel Air. That's the area I was looking at. Once we have this second crime that happened back in the March prior in South LA, now my profile expands and evolves. So now I have another location, and very difficult from a geographic profiling point of view, because obviously it's on the other side of the country. So you have this other location, but now you have 2 locations to work with, and you obviously have a path, right? You have potential path between the 2 locations to work with as well. So you're starting to develop this profile and taking the characteristics from both and seeing how they relate, or how they're different. So that's kind of where I went with once I had the South LA crime, and it just evolves from there. And then from there, if I'm if I'm on my own, if I'm working for law enforcement, I might start to look for similar crimes in those locations or on the path between, or as in working for the family, I work with what I have and I wait for further details.
And in speaking of a path, I mean, this is a 3,000-mile path in this case from East Coast to West Coast. It's not like it was Baltimore to, let's say, Washington, D.C. I mean, it's a massive path. So to me, that seems, from a geographical standpoint, seems incredibly daunting. How do you break it down from a geo-profiling perspective? I mean, like, what's the first step when you found out about this assault in South Los Angeles that matches the DNA of Rachel Morin's killer? How do you begin to look at that path, what you describe as the path?
Sure. Research in crime, there's a lot of good researchers out there and there's a lot of good analysts out there. But when you do crime analysis or crime research and you're trying to link these things, it's really, putting the pieces of the puzzle together and connecting the dots. And it sounds simple, but it's an entirely different skill set that a lot of great researchers don't have that skill set. They don't know, they can't think of, the right questions to ask to get them to the next level. With Rachel's case, for example, first it's how do you get from point A to point B? How do you get from South LA to Bel Air, Maryland? Well, you use something like Google Earth, you put in, point A to point B, travel by car or travel by vehicle. And there's only 3 interstates that get you there, 3 interstate paths that get you there. And then you also have to break it down. So, I mean, obviously the person could fly, but I didn't think the person was flying in this case. So then you break it down. Are they traveling by vehicle, by personal car, or by public transportation? All right. Now you have it separated. There's 2 interstate systems that get you there by public transportation. Now you have 3 by car. So you can start to break it down. And then along those routes, you're starting to look at where this person might have stopped and why. He was apprehended right at the junction of the 44 and Interstate 40 and 44, which is one of the interstates I had identified, but I didn't identify any specific town or city along. There wasn't we didn't have that data to do that.
He was caught in, I believe, Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? Basically,
exactly,
right in the
which
middle
is
of the
right
country.
which is right at that junction, that interstate junction.
Now, so that did not surprise you, I take it. But again, this is a massive country, as is Canada. So many places he could have been. But I mean, were you surprised when the suspect in this murder, who's now behind bars, as he should be in Harford County in Maryland, were you surprised when he was finally arrested in Tulsa?
No, not at all. And that goes back to a social media post I put up in January, I believe. And I just said, he's likely traveling on one of these interstates, which included 40 and 44 right at the junction there where Tulsa was. So, to me, it didn't surprise me at all. If he was caught up in Canada or caught, completely off that interstate system, it would have surprised me a little. And then there would have been, and that would have developed the profile further. It would have been a question is, okay, why is he there? So no, that didn't surprise me at all. And it didn't surprise me that, he was traveling along for, I believe it was for work. And because usually when offenders travel this distance, they're traveling because either they know somebody or they're traveling for work. Those are the 2 primary reasons we travel so far. Obviously leisure. People travel long distance for leisure, but I didn't think someone was going to Bel Air just for leisure. So it made sense as to the reason that he was there as well.
Well, I mean, also, like, the devil's in the details. So, I mean, with a profile, If you're working with law enforcement and you're like, well, I think he's traveling on this. If you're working with law enforcement, you're saying, well, if you say to them, well, I mean, he's likely on I-44. I think that extends east and west, basically across the country. I mean, that's not, you've got something, but it's way too broad still, isn't it? Like, you have to how do you keep iterating to squeeze down the profile to now say, well, instead of, I honestly have no idea where I-44 runs from where to where, but I mean, obviously you're going to help police much more if you can say he's on I-44 between Tulsa and whatever other big city, as opposed to he's on I-44, right? So you have to keep working to squish down this profile, right?
Exactly. And that's the big thing with geographic profiling is it's a tool to save law enforcement time, resources, and to help narrow down a suspect pool and to help focus an investigation. That's what geographic profiling does. So if I was working for law enforcement, I know they were, and I mean, they did a great job. And I know they were keeping an eye on similar crimes across the country, and every time a similar crime came up, it was in social media, on the news, like, is this the same person that attacked Rachel Morin? And that makes sense. But if I was working for law enforcement, I personally would have said, focus on similar crimes along these interstate corridors. That would have been one way that I would say that I would help them narrow down their investigation. Right.
And let me ask you, what part of this is you, Doug, the human geo-profiler, and what part of this is crunching information into programs, into computer programs that give you some sort of, that spout out something for you? Those who watch the show know I'm not very tech savvy, but are you applying everything to computer software as you go here to help with your profile?
I do most of mine manually. Now, there is geographic profiling software out there. It's very expensive. And there's also, GIS, Geographic Information System software out there that you can put this data in. But in my experience using it, I haven't found it to be better than doing my own analysis manually. And the thing to remember about software, it's only as good as the data you put in there. Mm-hmm. Right? It's a computer. It's based on an algorithm. So, for example, if you have a series of crimes, and traditionally geographic profiling is used to take a series of crimes and identify where the likely residence is of, say, a serial murderer or rapist or arsonist. Now, if you have a series of crimes, you put that in, and in a split second, that software will kick out a heat map of, based on the different points you put in, and obviously, and it'll kick out a heat map of kind of where the offender might be residing. But there's so many more factors that go into it. For example, I looked at one case and, unofficially consulted on one case, and it was a long series of sexual assaults, right? And in this series, there was five, I believe, different clusters. 2 clusters were obviously in recreational areas. The other 3 were not. So the other 3 clusters this person had to be familiar with them. And in the end, those clusters were anchor points. The individual had previously worked directly in the middle of all 3 of those clusters. But the case that really broke it was I think it was his final attack, his final crime he committed in bare feet, right? Why would this person be in bare feet? And is he going to travel 5 kilometers or 5 miles? Sorry, I'm Canadian. 5 miles in bare feet? No, he's not, right? So he was close to that location. But my point here is the software can't take into account all those little details, and it can change the whole investigation. So using some of this analytical software, geographic profiling or GIS software, is fantastic. And I do use it but it's not the be all end all, and I don't rely on it. I do all my behavioral analysis manually, and I always, even if I do start with the software, I always do my own profile over top, and usually my own profile takes precedence, and I go from there.
So also, just using Rachel's case as kind of a baseline for explaining geo-profiling. At one point, we were hearing that law enforcement was headed to Chicago. When you heard that, what did it tell you? How did you adjust your profile? At this point, it was still a complete whodunit.
Yeah, it didn't really change it at all at that point. When I create my profiles, I put in all the information I have, but I only deal in facts. So I only deal in black and white information. That's it, right? If there's a case like, oh, this case is similar, I may put it into my profile as a point to reference if it develops, so I can go back to it easily and refer to it. But it won't be in my profile. I won't change my profile. Nothing will change until I have some facts to back it up. So, for instance, DNA has been taken, and now that's a point that you have to include. Because if you don't deal in just facts, you're going to get off on so many red herrings, and you're going to get taken in so many directions. I've seen cases recently, like the Sebastian Rogers case. It gets taken in so many different directions that eventually, what are you working with here?
Yeah,
right? What are you working with?
He's the young 15-year-old with autism who went missing in Tennessee. Still has not been found. But go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, so and that case hasn't been solved. Obviously, he's still missing, unfortunately. But you really have to focus your case on what you're dealing with, and you can't get taken off into 100 different directions, because then you stretch yourself thin. You really have to follow the facts. You have to follow the most likely routes of investigation, and then if something branches you off, then you follow that, and then you go that direction with a new lead. But you really have to be careful not to include information that hasn't been confirmed.
Early on, you mentioned you're trying to solve like the when and where questions, but you said you're also looking at the suspect, the who. What were you doing as far as Rachel's case? In this particular case, it turns out the person who was ultimately arrested, and not to get political in any way, it's just a fact, this person was an illegal immigrant into the country from El Salvador, where he is said to have committed another murder of a young woman. How do you use the geo-profiling in terms of who the suspect is? And did you suspect that the suspect would potentially be an illegal immigrant in this country?
So for Rachel's case, and as a geographic profiler, and when I work cases when I don't work directly with law enforcement, I have a little bit of an advantage. If you're an offender profiler, criminal profiler, whatever you like to call them, you need to know the details of that crime scene. You need to know every little detail of that crime scene. How the person was attacked, what was used, how they were killed, how they were left. You need to know all these little details. As I mentioned earlier, you're looking to kind of paint a picture of the emotional and psychological and mental characteristics of this offender. I don't necessarily need those details. They help. They help in a lot of instances, but a lot of times I can get by working for families because I need other details that aren't necessarily being kept, secret by law enforcement, and for good reason. So in this case, in Rachel's case, I'm looking at, where she was attacked and when. So she was attacked at that bend in the trail. You could see 100 yards in either direction. in broad daylight on a Saturday afternoon when the trail was relatively busy. So, what does that tell me about the individual right away? They have a very low tolerance for risk. They're not concerned about it, and that's something you take into account when you look at threat assessment and risk management. But they have a very low threshold for risk. So this person is brave or careless. They're willing to take risk. The end goal is more important than the risk itself. And this whole risk assessment field is, it's called investigative economics, and it's another behavioral aspect of what I do, risk assessment. But these are some of the things. And then you're looking at, how many crime scenes were there? There was the trail and there was the tunnel. Well, why did this person need to take her to the tunnel? Why the tunnel? And then I look at, was this crime premeditated? And in my opinion, absolutely it was premeditated. And that doesn't mean that he knew he was going to attack Rachel, right? Because you can be premeditated without a selected target. It means that he had planned this crime out. He had picked this spot specifically for the secondary location of the tunnel because in that entire trail system, that was the only spot that you could commit this crime, conceal a body, and have time with the body afterwards in a secondary location because it was, a concealed location. So he had picked this spot prior and he had planned to commit some kind of crime here. And unfortunately, maybe we'll find out in the trial whether Rachel was, whether he had selected Rachel beforehand or not, but more likely she was opportunistic and she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, unfortunately. But I think the location was pre-selected in that case.
That's really interesting. So I was just going to ask you that. So Rachel could have just been running by, but he knew whoever the victim would be, that he was going to do it in this spot.
Absolutely. And I think that's where somebody like myself can play a role in court, in that without me mentioning those things, I don't think anybody's going to argue that this was a premeditated murder. Right. And obviously being premeditated changes everything when it comes to, whatever this, what this person's, what they are charged with in the end, and what charges go through. And so I think in court, I could play a role in that sense, in that I can show that a location is premeditated. It doesn't have to be the victim selection is premeditated. Going back to your other question, did I think this person was an illegal immigrant? Honestly, again, it goes back to just facts, and you have to keep all options open, right? All investigative avenues have to remain open. You can't say, when looking at this investigation at the very beginning, you can't say they were, you can't say they weren't. I mean, they might be. I mean, it's just a person, right? At that point, there's a person that committed this crime. Legal or illegal, they're still a person. And once you have more facts and you find out they're either illegal or illegal, sure, it can change how the investigation progresses, just due to travel and how long were they permitted to be in the country, and what may their ties be, and who are they associated with, and how'd they get here. Like, all that may change, but until that point, it's just a person. And you can't, if you're a profiler and you go into this saying, nope, it's an illegal immigrant from the get-go, you're really biased and you're closing off the entire investigation. I mean, just statistically, I mean, he ended up being an illegal immigrant, but just statistically, he probably wasn't, right? Statistics play a part of the investigation, not all of it, obviously, but just statistically, he wouldn't have been. But he did end up being, and that's fine, but you can't go into an investigation convincing yourself of that. You have to keep an open mind.
few more minutes with Doug MacGregor, the Geo Profiler. As did I. I know you've become close with members of the of Rachel's family and her family circle. What's that aspect of Geo Profiling like for you when you get to meet the victims' families, who are obviously all greatly affected by the crime?
Yeah, it's always it's probably the hardest part. Obviously, when I work with law enforcement, I never interact with the families, so I can keep that. I can just remain completely objective. I can keep that distance. When I communicate about the case, it's just, it's completely objective. I don't have to be careful about what I say. So obviously, all that changes when you're communicating with the family. You have to be empathetic, and you have to be sensitive. You want to be objective. I always try to be objective. I let them know that up front, as I did in Rachel's case, because there's no point in beating around the bush. They want to know the facts, so you tell them. It's not beneficial to anybody if you give them hope. It's not beneficial if you give them hope, and I've learned that over the last decade or so. And I'll give an example of that. I've worked when I work missing persons investigations. I had one case, and the family, the young lady went missing from Ontario, Canada, and based on the circumstances, I said, you're probably going to find her in this body of water. And they were convinced that she was taken into sex trafficking across the border into Buffalo. And believe it or not, that's hope, right? Because it's hope that she's still alive. Hope's found in the strangest of places. But there's no point in entertaining that. You say, yeah, it's possible, but this is more likely. I did another case recently, and it was a similar case, but it was, maybe they just went off on their own and left their life here. Maybe, but more than likely they took their own life, and they're going to be found in this river. And I had a case like that recently as well. You don't want to pretend like you know everything, because you don't. Any possibility is open, but you really want to tell them based on the facts. This is the most likely scenario, and this is the route that I think you should take as a family to investigate your loved one's disappearance or death. And with Rachel Morin's case, it was no different, and they were great to work with, all of them. They were all amazing. And I think they appreciated that I was upfront about everything. I always try to remain, sympathetic, sensitive, empathetic, because I am. It really cuts me deep, because I've been in a similar family situation, where I had, somebody go missing for years. So I've been there. I can relate to some of the cases.
Do you think that played a role in your interest in all this, your own personal experience?
Definitely. It's one of the reasons I got into geographic profiling. I can briefly go over that if you like.
Yeah, I'm curious if it's okay.
Sure. So when I was growing up, I had an aunt and uncle and two cousins that lived out west. They lived in North Vancouver, British Columbia. And we didn't see them very much. I remember seeing them when I was like 4 years old. And then after that, we didn't really see them. And my grandparents, all growing up, they always vacationed down south. So they were snowbirds. They vacationed in areas such as Texas, Florida. They were snowbirds. So they'd drive down there with their trailer or whatnot. Now, I just thought they were vacationing down there. I didn't learn until I was an adult that they were going down every winter to hand out flyers, because my uncle had been missing for 15 to 20 years. Wow. So he had been missing. He had schizophrenia. So he left his family. Schizophrenia was obviously the driving factor there. And they would get tips from where he was. And obviously this kind of got me into missing persons and working for families. So they go down, they'd hand out flyers. Eventually he was found deceased. He had taken his own life. Fast forward to 2013, and I went out to Vancouver. I had flown out there for 4 months. I was taking courses out there, one of them being geographic profiling. And the day before I landed, my male cousin, who had just turned 20, he had his second of 2 catatonic schizophrenic episodes. And, he was paranoia, everything. He ran into the police station. Someone's chasing me. So he was admitted to the mental health institute out there just the day before I landed. So
is this person related to the person who took his own life?
His son.
His son. Okay.
Exactly.
Wow.
So
Wow. Okay.
Obviously schizophrenia, and it ran in the family.
Wow.
So he was admitted. And while I was out there, a few weeks later, he got a weekend pass, and he came back to the house, and he was at the house, but he locked himself in his room, and he was reading the Bible all weekend. And I was already into the behavioral side of everything, and I was studying geographic profiling, and I was just about to kind of start working in the field. So I really had a real sense of all this, and all the red flags were going off. And he went back. We took him back. We walked him back on the Monday. And shortly after that week, he just went missing. And so we went, and this was a lockdown facility. So we went to the facility, and we had discussions with them and the RCMP out there, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And I guess what happened is he walked past the front desk, and he went down a service elevator. And because it's a lockdown facility, these service elevators, they only go out, they don't come in without a key card. So he couldn't get back in once he was out, but he knew his way out. And because I had studied a lot of, I was taking geographic profiling, but I was also taking victimology at the time too. So I had a strong sense of mental health and suicide. I had studied all these type courses, and just geographic profiling playing into it. We had meetings with the RCMP, and the first thing I asked them is, I said, have you checked high points? And they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, he doesn't have access to a firearm. I said, he's displayed signs that he may take his own life. And I said, you have to be checking these high points, and you have to be checking. And, there was also a big train system that went through there. They hadn't checked any of it. And the next day they had found that he had jumped off a bridge into an oncoming train. And taken his own life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, thank you. And it was, it was tough. Obviously, it was very tough on the family, on his immediate family, our extended family. But this really pushed me into, many aspects of what I do: missing persons, victimology, geographic profiling itself, where somebody might go. Working for families was a big one, and this is why I do all my all my work for families is pro bono, because my family went through it, and so it kind of really, on a personal note, in my personal journey, it really shaped who I am and what I do.
Again, I'm sorry to hear that, but it's interesting. We were almost not even going to discuss this. Came up as sort of an afterthought, but it's probably the most important part, or the most important aspect of likely what drove you into geo-profiling. And I got to say, of all the people who I've interviewed in my career, and there've been a lot of different types, politicians, lawmakers, the list goes on, law enforcement people, and investigators are definitely among the most empathetic of the people who I have interviewed, and Doug MacGregor is certainly one of those. Doug, if there was a single kind of high profile case that everyone knows about that you wish you could have geo-profiled? You have an answer for that? Is there one case that kind of stands out to you that you wish you could be involved in or had been involved in?
Yeah, there's definitely, quite a few. There's some that I may be involved in that hopefully at a later date I can disclose. I would love to assist in a reopening of the New Bedford highway serial killer case. There's several cases out west that serial cases that haven't been that need a greater look at. So I'm hoping I would like to be included in those, and the efforts are putting in there. And I guess where obviously as a geographic profiler that I can provide the strongest support up front, are the serial cases. But I am happy to assist in any case for law enforcement, wherever they feel they need that assistance.
I don't know why. When I asked you that question, I have no idea why I thought of JonBenet Ramsey. You think they're ever going to find her killer?
That's a tough one, and and don't get me wrong, I kind of skirted around your last question. I would jump at the opportunity to work any of those cases that have gone unsolved, and not for the clout, not for the attention, because I've worked a lot of high profile cases, which I wish I could mention here today, just to show, the how geographic profiling can be used. And I've worked a lot of high profile cases that I'm not allowed to mention because of NDAs and because of, verbal agreements. And, JonBenet Ramsey is one of them, that I would be more than happy to look at if my specific field could be applied. And to that, I'd be more than happy to look at that case. But will it ever be solved? I think it's one of those cases that something else, a new piece of evidence is going to have to, come to light. And I think any case has the potential to be solved. You just look at something like Jack the Ripper. Mm-hmm. It could be solved tomorrow, right? If somebody opens up a suitcase in their great-grandfather's house and it's got something in it. You know what I mean? So yeah. Any case has the potential to be solved, whether it's a piece of evidence like that or whether it's through DNA. Any case has the potential. So it would be interesting to work any of those cases.
Yeah, now we're seeing a lot more cold cases and old cases being solved because of the advancement in technology. You just listened for the last 58 minutes and change to Doug MacGregor, who's a great guy, but also a great investigator. He is the Geo Profiler. You heard him say early on, he solves crimes by answering the where and when questions. Where and when can we catch you on social media, Doug? And not quite ready to announce it yet, but we're hoping to have you be part of STS's family very soon, and we're going to be discussing that in the coming days. But for now, where can people catch you, either on Twitter or the other socials?
Sure, I'm very excited to be part of the STS family. Right now, I'm on X under the Geo Profiler, and I just put a post up today that I do have an Instagram and a YouTube channel under the same, the Geo Profiler. There's no content on either of those there yet, but there will be. And I'm looking forward to just taking some of the posts I put on X for those people that follow me, that style, but obviously put it into more of a media format on those other platforms.
Yeah, and Doug, the Geo Profiler, will be coming to an STS channel, hopefully near you very soon. More details on that to come. Thank you to Doug MacGregor for joining us. Love you, STS Nation. Love you, Ottawa, Canada, and everywhere near and far between. Thanks for watching this episode of Surviving My Biggest Case with the Geo Profiler, Doug MacGregor.